Right, if you're a fan of Deep Purple, especially Mark II Deep Purple, I think you're going to love this video. What I did is I went back and I found some newspaper articles, some reviews that were done right after the Perfect Strangers album came out. And Perfect Strangers, you're going to love these reviews, by the way. They're super interesting, especially looking back on them like this. But before we get into it, I just wanted to break out my own copy of Deep Purple, Perfect Strangers. And you can see here on the back of it, I'm sure you've probably seen this before, but we have the Mark II version of Deep Purple, kind of the classic lineup. You had Roger Glover, Ritchie Blackmore, Ian Gillan, John Lord, Ian Pace. And these guys were just, to have them be back together was a pretty big deal in the world of music, because what had happened is Ian Gillan, who was the singer, he had left and kind of dropped out of music for a while and then started his own band. And then eventually in '83 ended up amazingly on a Black Sabbath album, the Born Again album. And then back not long after he left, actually I think Roger Glover, bass player, left right around the same time he did. And it was a year or so later that Ritchie Blackmore leaves and he goes and forms Rainbow. And in the meantime, David Coverdale comes in and he starts taking over the singer and singing, and then Glenn Hughes comes in. And then, I mean, it just ends up, it's just wild, all this stuff. And one of the things I love about Deep Purple is the family tree. And I've talked about this before. We're going to do a video sometime going through the family tree of Deep Purple, because it just goes all over the place. It's so fascinating following all these people and all the different bands they left and went into. I mean, it's really, really fascinating. But anyway, when this album came out in 1984, they went on tour with it. They had a couple of actually kind of hits off of the album, and I really liked the first song on each side, and then the rest of the album I was a little bit underwhelmed with it. But there were a couple things in there that had, a lot of it had that classic Deep Purple sound in there. So for people that loved them, it gave them a little bit to hold on to. But I went and saw them on that tour, and it was pretty cool. I saw the band that was opening up for him was Jufria, if you remember them. Strange combination. Anyway, so I saw them on that tour. It was pretty cool. I'm too young to really remember Deep Purple when they were happening. I was just walking when Deep Purple was really on top. And so for me, this is kind of looking back, but you go back and listen to that Deep Purple stuff, man. They were, they get credited for being one of those really early quote unquote heavy metal bands. And of course, probably the most famous guitar hook ever, maybe outside of Iron Man, was Smoke on the Water. Bam, 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 bam. I mean, everybody knows that. So, okay, so I'm going to read these to you. I've got they're very short, 4 different articles, and these are reviews about, these came out in 1984, and these are all things talking about the Perfect Strangers album. Okay, so this one is called Sound Advice. It's from the Gazette, November 14th, 1984. Written by Dick Hogan, Gazette staff writer. And it says, Perfect Strangers improves second time around. Deep Purple, legends of heavy metal rock. Some say the founders of it have gotten back together after more than a decade apart, recording a fair album. I was less than thrilled with Perfect Strangers on the first listen, but more appreciative the second time when it was piped through earphones. Overall, I was most disappointed with Ian Gillan's vocals. His voice didn't seem as strong as it did in the band's heyday, though he does rise to the occasion on at least half of the 8 tracks. I think that's kind of fair. Because it was a little, man, in those early days, he was so brutal. It was so cool. I thought he was great on this album, though. So on Perfect Strangers, Ritchie Blackmore, guitarist Ritchie Blackmore, singer Gillan, keyboardist John Lord, bassist Roger Glover, and drummer Ian Pace have put together a fairly contemporary album with only flashes of their trend-setting late 60s sound. And that's kind of true. They integrated a lot of newer stuff in there, even though they had the classic John Lord organ, which when you get into 1984 with all the synthesizers and things coming in, there's this tendency to go, we're going to start. But John Lord was when I saw him in concert, he was still playing his B3, Leslie speaker, grinding out that sound that you can only get through a B3. Okay, for the uninitiated, Deep Purple emerged worldwide in 1968 with two large hits that were cover tunes of other people's songs, Joe Sal's Hush and Neil Diamond's Kentucky Woman. Now, by the way, that's not Mark II. At least the Hush was Rod Evans was singing that song. Both contrasted widely from the originals, especially the latter using a heavy distorted bass and an organ line on Blackmore's sometimes strident but always well-played guitar metal solos. Deep Purple gave a much harder edge to both tunes, causing many people to perk up their ears and exclaim, "Oh, wow." Deep Purple borrowed another oldie, River Deep, Mountain High, and I think that was Ike and Tina Turner. I think they originally recorded that, and had a fair hit with it, again adding its biting underground, as some call it then, and I'm going to turn to the next page, heavy metal touch to the rhythm and blues tune. Finding itself established, the band began concentrating on its own material, selling tons of albums, but probably Deep Purple's biggest original hit was its last, Smoke on the Water, in 1973. And I think that's the one, I think I mentioned that earlier in here, that's the one that had that riff that everybody in the world's heard that thing before. All the tunes on Perfect Strangers are originals. The words are often cryptic with flashes of a message apparent now and then. On Perfect Strangers, as it did years ago, Deep Purple doesn't rely on booming drums and short guitar power chords to deafen you and carry its sound. Sure, they're loud, but Deep Purple uses drums as support and not necessarily as the focal point of its music. And if you listen to Perfect Strangers in really good studio monitors, the drum sound they got on at least a few of those songs, I think Knocking on Your Back Door, is really, really, I mean, it was actually really, really good. So sure, they're the guitarists drive from the depths of bass notes to the top of the scale, showing they know what their instrument is about. That trademark electric organ support of Lord's is still present and sometimes moves to the forefront. A synthesizer is used sparingly on the new album. Yeah, like I said, John Lord's still, and the place to hear that is at the beginning, especially the beginning of the song Perfect Strangers. Da, na, 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 na. So cool. Anyway, it was kind of like this hearkening back to that amazing sound that no one was really doing at that point in the 80s. That was a thing that John Lord, that was his kind of signature sound. Well, a lot of people had the organ back then. The B3 was very, very popular, but for them to get back together and then still incorporate that sound. And it's actually using that helps the album actually still be relevant. Rather than going back into the synthesizers, the fact that they kept that kind of timeless sound, I think helps this album, even though I don't love it, it helps it still be sound fresh still even today. Perfect Strangers, the title cut, gets the nod for top track, opening with trademark organ and heavy bass. The tune moves into a funky plodding beat with a menacing guitar lead line. Hungry Days shoots off with a rapid-fire open and relies on recurrent, almost gypsy-like riff. Later in the tune, drums roll and come to the fore along with flashes of feedback and backward tape loops. The words appear to be the band's autobiography. And interestingly, that Hungry Days, it has a little bit of, what he's talking about there is when you get into the sort of the middle of it, it gives you a little bit of that Whole Lot of Love, the middle section of Whole Lot of Love, kind of that kind of taste. Okay, so there's the first article. So now here's the second one. Now a couple of these are kind of really fun to listen. I get a huge kick out of this stuff. Okay, this one's called 70s Band Still Has It. And it's by George Huidalchiliniuk. I don't know how you say his name. All right, this is from December 19th, 1984, Mississippi News, page 27. Deep Purple, Perfect Strangers. Remember Machine Head and Made in Japan albums from the early 70s? If you do, the musicians appearing on the album Perfect Strangers won't be strangers at all. The most popular lineup of Deep Purple is back together in full force. Ian Gillan, vocals, Ritchie Blackmore, guitar, John Lord, keyboards, Roger Glover, bass, and Ian Pace, drums. Haven't lost any of their driving energy, though it's been 11 years since they last performed together. This still is Deep Purple. This still is the Deep Purple that was one of the innovators of hard rock and metal. Wasted Sunsets shows the group has not forgotten its roots, the blues. The brimming sound of Lord's organ and Blackmore's blistering guitar, which Deep Purple is famous for on Gypsy Kiss, bring black memories, or I think it's probably supposed to be bring back memories of old. So the Wasted Sunsets, I don't know, that one kind of slows down a little bit, and I don't know, I didn't care much for that one. But A Gypsy's Kiss does have a little bit of that. When you hear it from the beginning, it has a little bit of that Highway Star sound that they had, that was one of their big hits way back when, but it just doesn't have one of the reasons I didn't gravitate to some of this music so much is it didn't have the same raw power that Highway Star did. It was almost a little bit the album itself was almost a little bit too polished. Lost some of that grit that they had back in the 70s. Okay, these last two, they're very short, but you'll love these things. So this next one is very short. These last two are very, very short. So this one is from the Toronto Star, Saturday, November 17th, 1984. Perfect Strangers, Deep Purple. Deep Purple, which established the British Metalloid School, hasn't been a working proposition for a decade, and the original members have all, at different times, declared varying degrees of animosity towards one another. It may be cynical to note also that their individual careers haven't exactly rocketed since the band's demise. For all that, however, Perfect Strangers actually delivers. It has plenty of what Deep Purple is best remembered for: slithering guitar solos, churchy organ swells, and lots of rhythmic blood and thunder. Best of all, the band's material is refreshingly free of references to satanic hordes, raw flesh, and chained women. Now, again, you got to remember when this was being written. This is 1984. Deep Purple, even though it's hard to put them in the same class, they were considered a heavy metal band, and so people who were putting them in that category are thinking about all the stuff that was heavy metal at the time, and Deep Purple's not that. Not singing about that. They're not putting those things in their songs, and that's kind of his point. It's refreshingly free of the references to satanic hordes. And anyway, so going on here, Chained Women. It's not the same turgid comic book stuff that modern heavy metal has become. Deep Purple, if only because it's older and wiser, is a class act. And again, the music is very solid, but Knocking at Your Back Door and Perfect Strangers for me are the only, and those were kind of the radio hits. They're the only two that really, that I really, really enjoyed. I played the album through, I tried playing it a bunch of times, and it just didn't resonate with me outside of those songs. It was good, it was cool, but it just didn't have. Now this last one, you're gonna love this. This is kind of comical because this guy does not like them, and he kind of mixes it up with all the metal stuff that was going on at the time. Okay, now this article is from the Peninsula Times Tribune, Sunday, December 23rd, 1984. And his little snippet is called Heavy Metal Madness. And it says, it's easy to spot a heavy metal fan. He's the one wearing leather, studs, long hair, and a Black Sabbath t-shirt. Hope he grows out of it soon. Meantime, make him a promise to use the headphones before handing over one of the following, which can tell you how much he likes this stuff. No Remorse, Motorhead. Any copy of this greatest hits compilation will do, but the limited edition vinyl version that comes in leather is best. 2, Out of the Cellar, Rat. Heavy Metal Monsters, Truly Bad. 3, Stay Hungry, Twisted Sister. Typical satanic stuff guaranteed to please almost any headbanger. And then here's where he throws Deep Purple in the middle of this and what he says about it. Perfect Stranger, Deep Purple. These guys are like something out of Spinal Tap, except they're serious. And then 5, he lists Animalize, Kiss, beastly hard rock. It's it's unfortunate that this guy put them in the same, in with Rat and Twisted Sister and even Kiss, even though Kiss comes from that era. Anyway, it's just kind of, this guy obviously thinks it's terrible. So anyway, this was kind of a mixed thing. Most people were pretty excited when it came out because it was, again, Mark II of Deep Purple coming back on the scene, putting some music out. I think as Mark II, they put out one more album and then it was all over again. And it's been such a mess. All the people in and out of that band. I think the guitarist now is Steve Morse, who used to play for the Dixie Dregs. And he's been with them probably longer than Ritchie Blackmore at this point, I think, is the amount of time he's been in there. Anyway, I'd really love to hear your feedback. Do the tracks that these guys picked up on, are those the ones that resonate with you? Did you like this album? Did you see them in concert? And if you saw them in concert, what did you think? You know, they were at that point veteran rock stars, and they were gone. They came back. And I'd really love to get your feedback about what you thought about this, what you think about what these people said. Did this album, Perfect Strangers, raise to the occasion to you? For me, you know, we were all excited it was coming out because we all knew who Deep Purple was, and we went and saw them in concert, and it was genuinely good. And so, at least to me. So I'd love to get your feedback with it. And with that, as always, have a fantastic day.